Did you compliment each other?
Once.
One
John
time?
gave me a compliment.
In how many years?
Once. I'm old. No, I think it's Revolver. But it was Here, There and Everywhere was one of my songs on it. And but John sort of, just when it finishes, that's a really good song, that. I love that song. And I was like, yes, he likes it. You know, I've remembered it to this day. It's pathetic, really.
As you just saw in that clip, Paul McCartney talked about how John complimented him once and how it stayed with him because it was the only compliment he ever felt he got from John at all. That little detail sets the tone for everything we're getting into, because it hints at how their relationship could be loving, competitive, and quietly tense all at the same time. John Lennon and Paul McCartney are usually remembered as pop music's gold standard for collaboration. Two writers who could turn private feelings into songs that felt like they belonged to everyone. But once the Beatles fractured, that same gift for melody and message became a weapon, and the breakup spilled into interviews, lawsuits, and records that sounded like arguments set to music. Fans have spent decades decoding the lyrical side eyes and hidden meanings, but one track towers over the rest for sheer directness. It was not a vague hint or a gentle nudge, it was a full-throated response written with the kind of sting you only aim at someone who once knew you better than anyone. Today we're looking at the song John Lennon wrote to destroy Paul McCartney. The spark that lit the fuse.
The thing is, do you expect us just to go on forever, making more and more money, making more and more figures, bigger and bigger?
The Beatles did not end in a quiet room with handshakes and a "we'll always be mates" promise. The split played out in public. And in the immediate aftermath, John and Paul weren't swapping friendly phone calls so much as squaring off through business disputes and the occasional sharp line in a song. Paul's 1971 album Ram is often treated as the moment the musical sniping got serious. On Too Many People, he included lines that many listeners took as a jab at John's habit of sounding like he was preaching. Even without naming names, the track felt like it was aimed at someone specific. Later, Paul acknowledged there was a small reference to John on the album, explaining that the preaching practices line came from annoyance at how John was carrying himself at the time. But in the moment, with communication already strained, even a tiny reference could feel like a slap. And from John's perspective, it wasn't just that one song. He believed other tracks on Ram carried digs as well, and even the album's imagery made people talk. Whether every detail was intended as a message or not, the result was the same. John felt targeted, and he decided to answer louder. How John heard messages everywhere.
And I got so furious when I heard Ram the first time that I just wrote the song,
You were furious because you don't think the level of music...
No, I was furious because there's messages on to me and the others in it. There are too many people.
You made the first mistake.
You made the first mistake. All those lines are directly to us. It ain't paranoia. It's directly to us. Like, I think Dear Friend is it. But we met the other week and we decided to stop it all. Because we both had enough.
When people describe Lennon's response, they sometimes frame it like he woke up one morning and chose chaos. But the more accurate picture is a slow burn. John had already been taking shots in interviews and making blunt statements about the Beatles, and Paul later recalled that it felt like missiles were coming his way. Paul's memory of that period is revealing, because it shows the emotional loop both men were stuck in. He tried not to respond at first, then kept hearing dismissive comments about the band and about his role in it, and eventually the frustration piled up until he decided to fire back through music. John, meanwhile, insisted he could hear Paul speaking to him through Ram. In one interview, he described picking up messages in those lyrics and basically dared anyone to pretend they weren't there. He wasn't treating it like casual gossip, he was treating it like a direct provocation. That's the key to why things escalated. Subtlety works when people are still talking because you can laugh it off later. But when two former partners stop communicating, even a mildly pointed lyric can start to feel like a public verdict. And once John decided Ram was a message board with his name on it, he didn't feel any need to be gentle in his reply. If Paul's lines were veiled, John was about to tear the veil off completely. George Harrison enters the room.
He just was trying to use that situation for some personal motive that he had, and it just didn't work. But, we're long past all the squabbles now.
One of the most interesting twists in the story is that Lennon didn't just respond alone. He pulled in George Harrison, and that choice mattered because George and Paul had their own tensions by the end of the Beatles. As George's songwriting grew stronger, he sometimes felt boxed in, and their working relationship could get combative. By the time the group was dissolving, that dynamic left Paul looking a bit isolated in the wider social mess. George and John teaming up on a track that aimed at Paul was not just a musical move. It was a statement about alliances in the post-Beatles world. John later raved about George's playing on the session, praising it in a way that makes the track sound like a victory lap as much as a diss. The excitement suggests Lennon didn't view the song as a throwaway jab. He viewed it as a moment, something he wanted to land with force. It also fits the pattern of the era. Instead of quietly processing grief and anger, these guys processed it on tape with world-class musicianship. That's part of why the feud still fascinates people. Even at their messiest, they were capable of making something musically compelling. And with George on board, the track gained another layer. It wasn't only John versus Paul anymore, it was the sense that the old band's internal friction had spilled into new combinations and new battle lines. The song that didn't hide its target. As we just witnessed in that little behind-the-scenes studio clip, John isn't delivering these lines like a distant rumor or a clever little aside. He's playing it in a candid, unguarded moment. And you can hear how the words are meant to land, especially when he leans into that Paul is dead jab and then twists it with in your head. The track at the center of the story is How Do You Sleep? And it's widely seen as Lennon's most direct musical attack on McCartney. Unlike Too Many People, which could be debated and decoded, this one was built to leave bruises. The lyrics don't just criticize, they mock. John even references the Paul is dead rumor with the line about people saying Paul was dead, a jab that feels designed to humiliate as much as hurt. It's the kind of lyric that makes you picture Lennon in the booth thinking, I want this to be impossible to ignore. Then there's the line that fans still quote as the knockout punch. The only thing you done was yesterday, and since you've gone, you're just another day. It's a nasty bit of wordplay because it drags Paul's greatest pop ballad into the mud and uses another title-like phrase to say he's faded. Paul later described having to work hard not to take the song too seriously, but you can hear the underlying sting in how he talked about it. In his mind, even if the pun was funny, the premise was ridiculous given his catalog. The emotion wasn't only anger, it was disbelief that John would try to reduce him to one song. If you want the simplest explanation for why this track endures, it's because it sounds like someone taking a swing that's meant to connect. It was not a wink to insiders. It was a punchline delivered with clenched teeth. John's Backpedal and the Quiet Repair.
I was answering a few little messages that Paul sent to me on RAM, you see, which only I publish my lyrics, you see. He doesn't, so you have to listen dead
but
hard.
Artistically and musically, I
it's
think
a good song.
If you listen to it, it's a beautiful song.
A little what?
Vindictive.
Well, it's an answer, you know. Paul personally doesn't feel as though I insulted him or anything, because I had dinner with him last week.
They
He's
were
quite
friends,
happy.
you know, and they were swearing at each other. Or,
If I can't
nothing.
have a fight with my best friend, I don't know who I can have a fight with.
Here's where the story gets more complicated. Lennon later softened the frame around How Do You Sleep and suggested that, in a strange way, it said more about him than it did about Paul. In the Imagine film, he presented the idea that he was attacking himself, using Paul as a mirror for his own inability to move on. That doesn't erase what listeners hear in the lyrics, but it helps explain why he might have written it in the first place. A breakup like the Beatles wasn't only professional, it was personal, like a family splitting up while the whole world watches. There's also the detail that John credited Alan Klein for the just another day line, adding a note of sarcasm about thanking him publicly. In other words, even while raging, Lennon still wanted to be clever, still wanted the feud to have a narrative and a supporting cast. Despite the ugliness, the fight didn't stay frozen forever. Reporting and later recollections point to the fact that John and Paul managed to patch things up in the years after, and John would again call Paul his best friend. That shift matters because it suggests the worst moments weren't the final word. Paul has also spoken about being grateful they had good times again before Lennon's death in 1980, because the alternative would have left him carrying a different kind of pain. In that sense, How Do You Sleep can be seen as both a low point and, oddly, part of the pressure release that helped the relationship thaw. The reason people still talk about the song is not just the savagery, It's the fact that the savagery came from a bond that had once been creative, supportive, and close, and the track makes that heartbreak audible. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think How Do You Sleep was John Lennon's honest anger in musical form, or was it more like a dramatic flair meant to end the argument once and for all? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.